to that first slide, please, Jay? Thanks. So good morning, everybody. I'm Emma Deere, and I'm hosting this series of webinars on behalf of the Tree Action Plan delivery team in Natural England. And we've put this together with colleagues from Forestry Commission, Forest Research and the Environment Agency. My team gives advice on woody habitat creation schemes to ensure that trees are planned for the best possible location without compromising other nature recovery. The Tree Action Plan delivery team works across 6 principles for woodland creation, and one of those is around increasing the potential for wet woodlands. And this webinar series was initially designed as a learning tool for the team. However, other Natural England staff also deal with wet woodlands in our protected site series, in catchment sensitive farming and in nature recovery. But while we're bringing the leading experts from FC, FR and EA, it also highlights that this subject's really relevant right across our organisation. So it's great to have this webinar series to share across the organisations, and welcome to everybody who's been able to join. I'm delighted to introduce the 4th and final wet woody habitat webinar. Jay, could I have the next slide, please? So here's some quick housekeeping rules. The forefront one of which is that all the webinars are being recorded alongside a PDF of the slides and a collection of the recommended follow-up resources. Please do keep yourselves on mute, and please put questions in the chat or hold them till the question section. Next slide, please. This series of webinars is designed to help us understand the importance of wet woody habitats. And in webinar 1, we were introduced to the classification of wet woody habitats and the biodiversity value, and heard case studies from a couple of sites that had re-wetted existing woodlands. In webinar 2, we learned a lot about eco-hydrology and how different wet woody habitats form. And in webinar 3, the last one, we heard from Tom Nesbitt and Chris Waterfield about why we want wet woodlands. We hope that this gives you a framework to really understand good priority habitat looks like, why wet woody habitats are scarce, why they're important for nature recovery, and how they function to help inform your day-to-day work and promote them. The final webinar, which is presented by Jay Doyle with a case study from Julia Matthews and Forestry England, will cover what you need to know on how to engage with landowners and make this happen. I'm going to ask Sarah to share a little interactive word cloud while I finish up. We can't cover everything about wet woody habitats in these webinars, and I think Jay is going to give it his best shot, so buckle in. But we hope that there's going to be a strong framework for the key issues that you should consider, with pointers to where you can find out more information. So I'll just let you have a minute to enter your word cloud word. We've got to do some more responses than this. Come on, people, put in a response, and so I can move on to the next slide. Maybe everybody's written hydrology. Okay, well, I'm going to move us on. I think that you're going to have to be more like fired up, but if you're going to be really fired up for Jay's, because he's got a lot of slides to get through. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to you, Jay, to take us forward.
Brilliant. Thanks, Emma. Well, firstly, I just wanted to say apologies for having to postpone the previous presentation, but also I'm so pleased that so many of you can join us today. Thanks very much for colleagues across Natural England, the Environment Agency, Forestry Commission and Forestry England for providing input and support to today's webinar. So what we want to do today is to explore how you assess opportunities for creating or restoring wet woody habitats, the funding that's available, the consents and permissions that are required to create or restore wet woody habitats, finish up by looking at some really exciting work underway on the nation's forests with Forestry England, and then Emma will conclude by just touching on next steps. So what I want to do today is spend sort of a large part of the time both talking about the assessment and latterly exploring the case study with Forestry England. But this information will be shared, as Emma has already said. So, you will have time to go back and look at all areas of the presentation in detail. So, I really wanted to just start off by drawing people's attention to the UK Forestry Standard, the government standard for both sustainable forest management and creation in the UK. And over on the right-hand side there, you'll see the key elements, the biodiversity, climate change, historic environment, and so on, and of course landscape, and noting Julia's contribution today. The fact that this document is very much an integrated document, that all of these elements are inherently interwoven, and this is something that we really need to consider when exploring the opportunities for new woodland creation, and in particular wet woody habitats. So in the biodiversity section of the UK Forestry Standard, there is a section that touches on the factors of the biodiversity factors, so to speak. Now, I always say that whether you're managing an existing woodland or exploring the creation opportunities for woodland, if you bear in mind all of these factors presented over on the right-hand side, and certainly your woodland management plan or your forest management plan bears these in mind, you will have a well-rounded site, a well-rounded wood. I won't touch on these in detail, but some of these factors will be explored as we go through the presentation, looking at site assessment. So I've come up with this proposal, which is, I hasten to add, very much a theoretical, hypothetical proposal. But down in West Dorset, a large landowner is looking to convert from productive agriculture, an amalgam of crop fields and improved grassland, and to work up quite a sort of an ambitious new woodland creation proposal that will have quite a significant amount of wet woodland and wet woody habitats. So we're looking at 110 hectare site. The objectives are very much for a multi-purpose woodland that delivers for nature recovery, provides nature-based solutions and timber production as well. Now, a key point to note is that the footprint of the site has been sort of referred to as black marsh, and that parts of that site do have that kind of periodic surface water flooding, seasonal inundation. So there's a few sort of hints there that we can take on board as we dive deeper. Now, by looking at the aerial photography, you're already sort of picking up on certain inferences, the possible sort of distribution of semi-natural habitat, also the improved status of some of the field systems, for instance. The more green and verdant a site, the more likely it is to have been improved. Unimproved grasslands tend to have more of a yellow hue, for instance. You're getting an idea of the sort of background agricultural use in this particular part of the world. And you're also noting that this site is in close proximity to the built environment and certain sort of communications infrastructure, such as rail lines. Now, so when you're looking at the OS backdrop, there's additional information you can pick up. So the contour pattern and topography of the site, and you'll note that in the north and the east, the land is slightly higher, that grades down to more sort of flatter lower ground. The references I mentioned earlier, the Black Marsh Farm, the presence of that, a sort of a historic echo, a proximity to a lake and a connected watercourse, and a very much a historic landscape, the presence of two castles to the southwest of the footprint, parkland, various farms, and you'll note that there is certain World War II infrastructure as well in terms of reference to camps nearby. Again, the proximity to the built environment and the infrastructure, as sort of a main A road running east-west to the north, and also the site is flanked by a major rail route, and the site is bisected by a public right-of-way. You can draw on various sort of mapping layers to help inform decision making. So here you'll see the land cover map, which shows the site to ostensibly be that amalgam of improved grassland and arable and horticulture, but also crucially that flanking by broadleaf woodland to the east, and in particular to the sort of south centre of the site. It's also useful to look at the agricultural land classification, and this shows the site to be very much grade 3 land, and so we aren't looking at sort of placing a proposal on some of the most agriculturally productive land. So we are sort of helping to avoid conflict with such issues as food security. Now, a layer that I always have recourse to at the onset of exploring a site is the soilscape layer available on Magic and other portals. But what this primarily shows you is polygons that provide the underlying geology, the soils, the hydrology, as we referenced earlier in the word cloud, and the current land use, but critically, crucially rather, the semi-natural habitats that are both present in the landscape and likely to arise. And just to give you an example, on that higher ground I referred to earlier based on the contours, you're seeing reference to impeded, slightly impeded drainage, and that the sort of natural background habitats would be ancient woodlands with some wetter areas. But then you stray lower down into the next polygon on the lower lying land, and you'll see reference to a naturally high groundwater. The site is naturally wet, and would have supported wet car woodlands. So this is automatically sort of looking quite good in terms of prospects for wet woody habitats. This isn't an issue for this particular site, but I would always recommend checking the England peat map, both for the sort of the presence on the site, but also proximity to peat resources if they are sort of nearby or interconnected to your site. Also, it's quite useful to make this sort of point here that using the example of the Surrey Hills National Landscape, the kind of close interaction between wet woodland and the peatland resource, and these are springline wet woods. So that's just useful to see that, sort of plotting that against woodland cover and the springline wet woodlands. So wet woodlands are sort of bound up, interwoven with the peat resource. Now, the peat guidance that accompanies the peat mapping, this is a joint document between DEFRA, the Forestry Commission and Natural England, and really important to have reference and recourse to this to inform your decision making. Certainly for the protection of the peatland resource, the establishment of new woodland, and then re-establishment of existing woodland on peatland. Wader sensitivity in this part of the world, not an issue, but nevertheless I have overlain the Wader zonal mapping onto the site, and this is very important, certainly more so in the uplands of England. It can have some utility in lower lying areas, certainly around estuaries and sort of, in relation to lowland protected areas that support breeding bird assemblages, but primarily for use in the uplands. But I just wanted to show you what that looks like. And again, we have bespoke Wader guidance developed jointly between DEFRA, the Forestry Commission, and Natural England in terms of woodland creation. Now, here, just wanted to touch on, another key consideration is either intersection with or the nearby presence of protected areas. In this particular landscape, I know that the offset triple SIs, for instance, in the red to the northwest and southeast are very much geological sites, so not really an issue here. And to the far west of the town itself, we have a local nature reserve, but not in any way interrelated with this particular site. So it does look like protected areas are not really a consideration in this instance. But in other areas, other parts of the country where we're considering a scheme, I think it would be useful to also bring in such things as important plant areas, the important bird areas that helpfully not only cover the underlying, for instance, special protection areas, but the nearby sort of functionally connected land often as well. And if you have access to that, depending on which county or unitary you're working in, potentially the local wildlife site data. And certainly in our grant schemes, we would recommend applicants, request that applicants actually obtain that information. Now, just to very quickly have a quick overview of both the ancient woodland resource and the other priority habitat layers in the priority habitat inventory. And we can see here off to the south, we have both the wood pasture and parkland and the ancient wood pasture. We also have fringing deciduous woodland as the priority habitat. And then nearby we have good quality semi-improved grassland, and in the far north, lowland calcareous grassland as well. So we're already getting a picture of both the wooded and the open priority habitats and the nature of the ancient woodland resource. Just to say that we have our own internal ops note for the principles for afforestation, which is currently being reviewed and updated. But this sort of sets out a general presumption against woodland creation on priority open habitats. Do read that if you aren't familiar with that document. It is publicly available on gov.uk, and I just would advise familiarising yourself with that, noting that it will be updated. Now, a really exciting development recently by working with Natural England and the Botanical Society of Great Britain and Ireland, we have access to these botanical heat mapping layers, which effectively cover 1 kilometre monad grids, but also go down to 100 metres. So in this instance, this layer shows that we have sort of low value for grassland priority habitat positive indicators, very much according with that improved grassland status. But what we do have is moderate value for fen, marsh and swamp priority habitat positive indicators. So very useful to see this, noting both the history of the site and nearby habitats, and also the sort of intersecting drainage network. And here, what you'll see is that there is moderate value for ancient woodland indicators, and certainly the heat will improve to the south and the southeast of the footprint, where we know we have ancient wood pasture and ancient woodland in a sort of intimate mixture. Now, the 100-metre resolution layer, we don't have any intersection in terms of this particular site on the footprint. But if we did, we can obviously, on our internal systems in the Forestry Commission of Natural England, identify which rare, scarce or threatened plant that is. And then by recourse to the BSBI plant atlas, we can learn a little bit more about the natural history of the plant. Is it more of a woodland associate or an open habitat associate, potentially somewhere in between? So really useful to make use of that facility if we do begin to flag rare, scarce or threatened plants on or an immediate sort of adjacency to the site. Now, opportunity mapping. The first thing I would say, first and foremost, is do have sight of your local nature recovery strategy and the layers and the measures, the mapped measures that are within those strategies that often flag the opportunities for wet woodland in a given part of the landscape. Here I'm just going to display the England Woodland Creation offer layer, which I'll talk more about later as an incentive scheme. What this shows that on that higher ground to the north and on the eastern flank, we have sort of opportunities for sort of woodland per se, but in the low-lying areas along the south of the site and to the west, we've got the opportunities for floodplain woodland. So this is looking like a really kind of viable site for sort of exploring wet woodland and wet scrub and generally wet woody habitats. But what we obviously need to do is to get down on the site and have a look at the situation as it stands. What is that landscape telling us? So what we need to consider is such things as the habitat types, of which we've already sort of picked up inferences in the desk-based surveys. But when you get out on the ground, you'll obviously be able to look at the drainage infrastructure. So you'll be able to see those visual cues. You also sort of need to consider subsurface drainage as well, and fill drains, which of course aren't necessarily visible. However, you may see the sort of associated infrastructure with that. And also, is there any impeded drainage, for instance, on field margins with ephemeral water? So I talked a little bit about the sort of history of this sort of part of the landscape previously. And what we know is that the northern edge of the castle off to the southwest historically connected to a mere. So I can't sort of underestimate the value of speaking to historic environment colleagues, to get that sort of support, to set that sort of backdrop, the historical evolution of the landscape. Now we know that there was a mere, and you'll see a set of steps going off down to the low ground, and that there was actually sort of a mooring area. There are historic sort of interpretations of that, where people could literally go out and fish in the wetland. So this is very much a defensive feature, and perhaps the mere or the lake itself was also part of that defensive infrastructure. So what may have occurred in this particular landscape that was referred to as Black Marsh would have been something like a shallow lake with fringing reed beds, wet scrub, and wet woodland that would have transited into mixed deciduous woodland or wood pasture on the higher ground. So we're building up a sort of an understanding from sort of historic context as well. I've just showed you a representation of the wood pasture and parkland, the ancient wood pasture and parkland off to the south. And this is that eastern margin that I've referred to on the higher ground. It adjoins this bit of woodland, which is mapped as wood pasture and parkland, and deciduous woodland as a priority habitat. This is a look from east to west over the sort of improved grassland, arable fields, and hedgerow network. And we've got occasional hedgerow trees when we look to the southwest in particular, but also fringing trees on the southern margin, which was of course picked up in the land classification layers. Just to demonstrate that the improved nature of this grassland. However, survey time is key here. Obviously, you would want to explore the site in the optimal months of the year. But I do know that these particular fields have been sort of heavily treated with manure in particular, given the proximity to the dairy farm. And here you can see the nature of the intensive cropping. This in particular has been used for maize, and there is an absence of buffer strips around the margins of these cropped fields. Here you'll see this sort of lattice network of surface drainage, often closely in association with the post-enclosure hedgerows, but there is likely significant subterranean field drainage as well. So what we need to be factoring in here, going back to that, the importance of understanding the hydrology is a hydrological survey to understand how the water is functioning in this very modified part of the landscape. And that will of course influence the type of consents that you'll need to acquire. So a key thing that we really need to look for when we're exploring opportunities is, are there any areas of kind of damp habitat that are arising from potentially impeded drainage? Now, this could be marshy grassland. We have a swathe of that on the lower lying part of one of these fields. But we must also consider the possibility of natural springs that in certain parts of the landscape that perhaps haven't been drained, modified, and of course the presence of any ponds and wet scrapes that can survive in the margins of field corners, for instance. Now, as I was leaving this particular site, I got some really important sort of insight into what happens when this particular part of the landscape perhaps is left to renaturalize in a more sort of self-willed way. And it almost happened in a kind of a succession as I walk from one field along to the next. So here you're seeing the evidence of sort of returning natural processes as the management is relaxed and the rushes are re-establishing on the damper areas. You go just back from that and you're beginning to see the natural colonization by wet scrub happening. And then a little bit further along, you then begin to see the development of wet scrub that has succeeded from, wet scrub succeeding to wet woodland. So things are stacking up quite nicely for this site in terms of it being a suitable site for the creation and restoration of wet woody habitats. I'm going to close this particular section by just drawing your attention to the Ecological Survey and Assessment instructions for new woodland creation in England. And there are sections in here about what the Forestry Commission would require from the vegetation surveys, the peat surveys, and the upland wader surveys in particular. But I would advise you spending some time reviewing this guidance. It's really, really useful. We started its development around about 2020, published the first version 2021, and you'll see it has been updated as of last year. Now, this is a section that I will breeze through, but as I say, do come back to it and explore at your leisure, because there is a lot of ground to cover. But I'm going to start off by looking at the Forestry Commission's England Woodland Creation Offer. You'll see it has the gov.uk presence, and we've developed a really useful sort of print off their publication, which gives you a good overview of the offer itself. But it is very much a flagship scheme to encourage new woodland creation in England, and provides support for creating new woodlands, and it's open for applications year round. It covers planting and natural colonisation on areas as small as 1 hectare. So obviously the site I've just alluded to would be well in scope. You can receive up to 10,200 a hectare, plus up to an additional 12,700 in stackable payments when delivering wider benefits to society, nature recovery and the environment. But to secure agreement in time for the next planting season, applications must be submitted by the close of June. So I put in here some detail around about eligibility, which I won't go into any detail on, but please do refer back to that when you're exploring gov.uk. But there are effectively 5 types of payment. So there's support for the capital items. There is a 15 years of annual maintenance payment to help establish the young trees once the capital works are complete. A contribution towards the actual cost of installing infrastructure. There are additional sort of optional contributions and an additional payment for low sensitivity land. And linked into the Forestry Commission grants, and something that you would need to apply prior to actually applying for the grants, is the Woodland Creation Planning Grant. And again, you'll see we've developed some bespoke sort of publications to inform that. But it really is a funding sort of mechanism that helps with the creation of the woodland design plan. And you can apply for £1,500 to complete stage 1, and then the stage 2 payments can help cover the site appraisal map, the design concept plan, and to draft a woodland creation design plan, which is ultimately compliant with the UK Forestry Standard. Now, the funding can help you gather and analyse information on biodiversity and geology and all of these other factors that you'll see. But of course, today we are talking critically about biodiversity. So you will need to develop a UK Forestry Standard compliant plan. So just wanted to flag the Woodland Creation Planning Grant as a really useful support mechanism to landowners and managers. And I'll move on now to countryside stewardship. So a scheme that's owned by DEFRA, who determine the rules and the payment rates. The Rural Payments Agency administer the scheme and manage all of the agreements. And then the CS Higher Tier scheme is competitive and it invites it's on an invite-only basis with priorities based on local pipelines that are maintained by Natural England. The Sustainable Farming Incentive is a separate scheme, but designed to be complementary with the CS Higher Tier. Now, the CS Higher Tier revenue payments can be used to maintain, restore, and create wet woody habitats under the Higher Tier. And it's usually described as CS options or CS actions. So some of those actions require an implementation plan or feasibility plan. For instance, CSW 12 is designed to make room for the river to move, and it will need restoration plans signed off by the EA and Natural England. So it is possible to stack some actions, for instance, CSW22 to connect the river and floodplain habitats, and CWD2 managing the woodland. But check with your Natural England farm advisor first. The supplements can be added to actions. For instance, CWS8, managed native woodland supplement, can be added to CWD2, managing woodland. But you cannot have two revenue-based agreements, for instance, UCO and CS higher tier, on the same land parcel. So countryside stewardship payments can be part of CS higher tier agreements. CS capital payments can be part of CS higher tier agreements, or in a standalone or capital offer agreement, and used to undertake the initial works at the start of restoration or creation. The capital payment items can be used prior to entering another revenue payment agreement, such as UCO, as long as it is not paying for the same thing twice. The capital works must be completed first. So I'm just going to touch on the roles of the organisations involved in CS. So the Forestry Commission leads on the CS higher tier actions and supplements on woodland applications. Agroforestry applications are joint FC-NE projects. FC is the initial lead contact. The lead partner depends on the density and the sensitivity of the site. The Natural England Farm Advisory colleagues lead on all other CS higher tier actions and supplements. And the Environment Agency gives advice on water-related CS higher tier actions and supplements. On mixed applications, multi-contacts can be used, and the applicant decides who best to approach. Now, this is a section that I will breeze through, but I just wanted to sort of touch on some of the payment figures here. So, for instance, the Make Room for the River payment is a 20-year agreement, and you'll see is up to £1,489 per hectare per year. The Connect the River and the Floodplain is a 10-year agreement, and you'll see that it's £1,242 per hectare per year. And the Managed Woodland payment is a 10-year agreement, £127 per hectare per year. But for the Ancient Semi-Natural Woodland supplement, you'll receive £144 per annum. There's Managing Riparian and Water Edge Habitat, a 10-year agreement, £1,186 a year. Riparian Woodland, so a 15-year agreement, up to £12,700 per hectare. And the 15-year agreement is £350 per hectare per year. And the Riparian Management Strip, a 5-year agreement, paying up to £742 per hectare per year. There are payments for feasibility studies and major capital works. PA2, the feasibility study, PA1, the implementation plan, and FM2, the major preparatory works. Do come back and look at that in detail. I'm going into a bit more detail here on the countryside stewardship higher tier actions, the supplements and the capital items to support the management of wet woodland. So you'll see there is a payment for native and ancient, CWS8, for plantations on ancient woodland sites, CWS2, and for resilience, CWS5, and a variety of other different supplements and here. So CWD2 for woodland improvement, CSP2 for the re-wetting supplement, CWS9 managed woodlands for flood and drought mitigation supplement, and then CSP21 for control of mink, CSP9 support for threatened species, and CSP 13, 14 and 15 for invasive species control and management, CSW 22 to connect the river and the floodplain habitat, CSW 25 to manage the riparian and water edge habitats, and CSW 12 make room for the river to move, as we touched on previously. Just looking at some of the costs that are sort of payable by the DEFRA family here, and you'll see a variety of different payments. Some of those I've already touched on. Again, do come back to this particular slide. So the re-wetting supplement is a 5-year agreement to restore the habitat wetness and to manage the land to keep it wet. CWS 9, manage woodlands for flood and drought mitigation supplements. So managing the woodland to retain the water and create temporary water storage features using capital work. So here you'll see a leaky woody dam. And CSW 25, manage riparian and water edge habitat. CSW 22, connect the river and the floodplain habitats. Now that's stackable with CWD2 in woodland and within EA flood zone 3. And here are some of the invasive plant species payments that we touched on earlier, and just some examples of some of these species. You'll see skunk cabbage here, and Himalayan balsam, a variety of other invasive plant species that we can use these payments to help support the control and removal of. And threatened a variety of threatened species supplements here. So you'll see the willow tit, a key focal species, and the introduced American mink. So here you'll see the capital items to manage the water available in the woodland set out. Again, I won't go into detail here, but do come back and refer to this. RP3 is for watercourse crossing, RP6 the installation of pipe culverts in ditches to help manage water levels. And TE16, use tree surgery to hinge a tree into the watercourse. Really important in that renaturalization process. TE10 is the coppicing of bankside trees. And here you'll see some really helpful sort of examples of the small leaky woody dam and large leaky woody dam options here. And WN12, create and restore ponds up to a certain size. And again, pond creation we will touch on later, but this is a complicated area, and we will be returning to this in a subsequent webinar. RP9, earth banks and soil bunds. WN2, the creation of scrapes and gutters. WN10, the construction of water penning structures. WN11, install temporary water storage features. So I'm going to move on now away from the CS higher tier payments to the Water Environment Improvement Fund. So WEIF is a UK government funding programme designed to enhance the ecological health of water bodies across England, and it supports the statutory objectives in River Basin Management Plans and the Environmental Improvement Plan 2023. So what does this do? Well, it funds projects that restore rivers, lakes and wetlands, improves the water quality and biodiversity, reduces pollution, and helps to mitigate climate change impacts. And it supports that catchment-based approach. The Environment Agency manages WEIF as part of its environment programme. Funding is allocated through the local catchment partnerships based on the catchment-based approach and prioritised through the medium-term plan. Now, projects must align with national water environment goals and demonstrate measurable ecological benefits. There are various delivery mechanisms, the grants, the collaborative agreements, and the Environment Agency contract framework. So again, I would implore you to go and look at this on gov.uk in more detail. Here is an example of the river restoration plan. The aim here is to restore the natural geomorphology, often using these CS higher tier actions. Wet woody habitats are likely to be a key element in these plans. The river restoration plan, who do you approach to check if there is a plan? For instance, the Environment Agency, Fisheries, Biodiversity and Geomorphology teams have respective specialists who can help provide advice. For example, geomorphologists may be able to provide bespoke advice. Natural England area teams have freshwater and water advisors that may be able to advise you, and if your project includes a SSSI, should be the first point of contact. I'll move on now and make my way through the district level licensing, which is a more recent development. And there are a number of different schemes within this, so you need to sort of check carefully which one you might fall within. There is the Natural England district level licensing scheme. There is the Nature Space district level licensing scheme, and the local authority district level licensing scheme. So obviously some work involved in there in just deciding which would be the best fit for you. But here is a map of the current district level licensing providers according to these sort of coordinating entities. Now, Natural England publishes the strategic opportunity areas for great crested newts, and they're ranked using the ecologically important landscape features. They're split into core and fringe areas to encourage the expansion and of the population and expansion of distribution. The SOA scores for each region differ due to the different habitat types, features and restrictions in each area. But check the SOA to see if the land is in a suitable location for any pond creation and is eligible for that funding stream. What do the landowners actually get? Well, you can reference gov.uk for more sort of detailed insight to that. But the brand new ponds and or restoration of existing ponds meeting those criteria can be supported. And the agreement is for 25 years, including the monitoring and the maintenance. So there are a number of incentives available, up to £700 per pond for multiple ponds, negotiated with the habitat delivery partner. That could be the wildlife trusts or FAG, for instance, and it is a single upfront payment. It's non-legally binding. Landowners are not tied in for specific time periods and don't have barriers to selling their land. Habitat delivery partners manage the work, or the landowner does the work themselves for the higher payments. There are other schemes available to landowners to install restore ponds, including biodiversity net gain and local funds. The created ponds must be 150 to 1,000 square metres, and restored ponds must be free of great crested newts. The DLL ponds, the land cannot be double funded, and schemes can be stacked. The Woodland Water Code, linked into the Woodland Carbon Code. So a voluntary code is being developed to generate woodland water units from woodland creation schemes. It aligns with the Woodland Carbon Code, as I've said. It's a UK-wide code backed by the regulators. There are three principal water benefits: water quality, flood alleviation, and water shading. Targeting of areas where woodlands can provide the greatest benefits to water, and developing a standardised methodology that can be rolled out at scale. And you'll see here reference to some guidance material that's available on gov.uk and via Forest Research. Now, moving into this next section, which I'll move through at pace, we're going to explore the consents and permissions that might be needed. So I wanted to touch on environmental impact assessment, and in particular talk about the forestry context here, accepting that there are other EIAs. So there are 20 different EIA regimes used in UK law. Forestry is one of 5 under DEFRA, also including agriculture, marine, watercourses and drainage. The development falls under the Town and Country Planning EIA regs. Now, woodlands provide many benefits to the environment, but some forestry ops have the potential to cause harm. The forestry EIA exists to ensure we check forestry proposals to minimise that potential harm. The right project, the right place, the right reasons, done in the right way is the key thing to note here. Now, forestry EIA mirrors the UK forestry standard. It ensures that UK FS compliance will likely mean that the potential for environmental harm is minimised. So the scope of that forestry EIA, the regulations apply to 4 project types: afforestation, deforestation, forest roads and forest quarries that are often used to provide the materials for that road construction. So the spirit of the forestry EIA, the EIA regs say some proposals may need the Forestry Commission's consent before they can commence. The regs provide a framework on how to arrive at a decision as to whether a proposal needs consent. And in essence, the EIA regs ask you to consider what's special about the land and what happens when you add or remove trees to or from it. It's a 2-stage process. Stage 1 offers the applicant a way to obtain certainty on whether their project will require consent. Stage 2 is where the applicant seeks the Forestry Commission's consent. So Stage 2 is much more involved. The applicant must prepare an environmental statement, undertake statutory consultation, and complete multiple steps. It is a lot more work and can take months to complete. Most projects that go through stage 1 EIA will not require consent. So statistically, less than 1% of cases. So the stage 1 application, there's 2 different types of stage 1, depending on the project type size and the land sensitivity, which break down into the opinion and the notification. So applicants can voluntarily request the Forestry Commission's opinion on whether their project will require consent. Opinions are optional. The notification, applicants notify the FC of their woodland creation plans. The land is pre-screened for sensitivities, so the assessment can be lighter touch, and notifications are mandatory. Now, for those seeking FC grant funding, obtaining an EIA Stage 1 decision is straightforward. Questions are incorporated into the grant application form. I'm now going to move on to environmental permits. So to check if you need an environmental permit, do go to gov.uk and the flood risk activities. All watercourses have a risk management authority, and this of course differs. It could be the Environment Agency, local councils, internal drainage boards, the water utility companies themselves, or the highways departments. So who you approach depends on where you are, whether you're dealing with a main river or ordinary watercourse, and the activity involved. The landowner, the legal occupier, or the operator may need to seek an environmental permit from the relevant authority if the creation or restoration of a wet woody habitat could pollute the air, water, or land, increase flood risk, or adversely affect land drainage. The examples of permits are flood risk activity permits, land drainage consents, impoundment licenses, waste licensing, or abstraction licenses. You can get free basic pre-application advice from the Environment Agency before you apply for the environment permit. So environmental permits, low risk impounding activities are exempted. But if the activity does not fall under these descriptions, then an impounding license will be required. So do take some time to look through this material on gov.uk. Now, protected site permissions, which fall with Natural England. These include the triple SIs, the special areas of conservation and the special protection areas, and the Ramsar sites. So if you're creating that wet woody habitat on a triple SI, the landowner or occupier or their agent needs to submit a notice to Natural England for triple SI consent. Natural England can't accept notices from third parties, and the notice should include what you plan to do, when you plan to do it, where you plan to do it, and how you plan to do it. Proposals that may damage a feature of interest are unlikely to be consented, and it can take up to 4 months to receive a consent. So do factor this into your implementation planning. So creating wet woody habitat can be delivered as part of a statutory duty by a public body, for instance, Forestry England. The body should screen the proposal to assess whether it is likely to damage or disturb the features of interest. Only submit a notice to Natural England for triple SI assent if the statutory body believes the work will damage or disturb a feature of interest. It's unlikely to damage a feature, there is no requirement to seek that assent. Now, creating wet woody habitat outside of the triple SI but functionally linked to one is an important consideration. The statutory body should screen the proposal to assess whether it is likely to damage or disturb the features of interest. Only submit a notice to Natural England for triple SI advice if the statutory body believes the work will damage or disturb a feature of interest. If it's unlikely to damage a feature, there is no requirement to seek advice. In both cases, responsibility for producing the HABS regs assessment, where an SAC or an SPA and or a Ramsar site is involved, lies with the relevant consulting body, not Natural England. Now, ancient woodlands. I will go through this very quickly, but to say that the soil component of ancient woodland is key to the ecological value of what is an irreplaceable habitat. Any creation of wet woody habitat in ancient woodlands must be carefully considered by adopting an evidence-based approach. The prime focus should be on restoring disturbed or disrupted hydrological processes. So this could be, for instance, historic drainage interventions in springline wet woodlands. However, I think it is important to consider that modern forestry interventions often create ephemeral wetland features that are of value to wildlife. Now, depending on the scale and the level of impact, is this damage or is it dynamic disturbance? Does it mimic the effect that large herbivores once delivered, for instance, the aurochs, the wild boar, and red deer? And we also just need to be mindful that the ancient woodland inventory is currently undergoing a review with Natural England, and it's important to explore the revised layers which are being uploaded to the DEFRA family and public portals in a phased manner. So do be mindful that there is a degree of flux in terms of the mapping underway in a very positive way with greater definition and additional categories coming online. Now, wildlife licenses, in terms of protected species, the hierarchy here comes into play. The European protected species are protected under the HABS regs. All bat species, the great crested newts, otters, etc., need licenses for any activity that may disturb or harm them or their breeding and resting places. The Schedule 5 and 8 Wildlife and Countryside Act species need a license for any activity that could cause death, injury, disturbance, or habitat damage. All wild birds are protected under the Wildlife and Countryside Act. Some have additional protection during the breeding seasons. Some birds are covered under general license, and others will need a more specific license. And then, of course, the Section 41 species, the priority species listed under the NERC Act, if they are not listed above, then they do not require a license, but are instead protected through our biodiversity duties under the Environmental Act 2021. Now, I won't go into great detail here, but just to sort of touch on the point that there are 4 types of licenses for wildlife licenses. So the general license for low risk work, the class license for specialist work, the individual licenses for activities such as disturbance, trapping or handling, and includes a mitigation license for development work affecting protected species. And lastly, the organisational licence, undertaking routine work by an organisation and affecting protected species. With wet woody habitat creation, the initial surveys and early discussions are important to ensure potential delays caused by licensing are kept to a minimum. And you'll see there the contact details of the team within Natural England that handle this important work. So, wanted to just go through ponds and planning very quickly because we will have an upcoming webinar involving the DEFRA family and the Freshwater Habitats Trust later next year. But really, it is very important to contact your local planning authority because your pond may or may not require planning permission. But what we need to do is avoid impact on protected and priority species in the vicinity of that pond, avoid impact on other priority habitats, for instance, unimproved grassland, such as the lowland meadow category, also wet woodland itself. And avoid, but consent will certainly be required for designated sites. So do contact Natural England at an early stage. And of prime importance here to ensure that that pond is fed by clean water, that it is not connected up to an existing sort of drainage network, and that it will deliver the best possible benefit to biodiversity. So at this stage, we're going to switch over to Julia. I'm going to drive the slides, but Julia will certainly come in and lead on the work that's underway with Forestry England in the new sites being acquired by as part of the nation's forests.
Thank you, Jay, and thanks everyone for having me here today. So I'm just going to talk for about 15 minutes or so about some of the wet woody habitat that we have been designing into our new woodland creation sites. I'll give a quick overview of the woodland creation programme first. If you want to change slides, please, Jay. Just to give a bit of context to the case study. So Forestry England's Woodland Creation Programme is funded by Nature for Climate, DEFRA's Nature for Climate Fund, and the programme started in 2021. So it's in its infancy, really. It's only 4 years in. We started with 1 team member and we're now up to about 17. We don't yet have an ecologist in the team, actually, so we rely quite heavily on forest services ecologists and advice from Natural England and our own in-house ecologists for advice on all of our sites that we acquire. In the past 4 years, we've acquired 25 sites across the country. Here's a little map just showing the kind of rough distribution of them. And initially, our sort of original business case was to plant 2,360 hectares by March 2027. To date, so in March 2026, so next year, we will have planted 1,984 hectares, and we're on target to plant 3,000 hectares by March 2027. So yes, we've reached all of our planting targets, which has been amazing, an incredible achievement from everyone across Forestry England, Forest Research, all the partners we've worked with. Our average site is around 90 hectares, but this completely varies from smaller sites of around 20, 21 hectares, which is what I'm going to talk to you about today, to up to 300 hectares, which are mostly sort of located in the Lincolnshire area. Next slide, please, Jay. Thank you. So Jay asked me to give this talk today, and I'm not an ecologist. I'm not an expert in wet woody habitat. So as a landscape architect, it's my role to gather all the information I can about the site from the ecologists, from heritage advisors, and the local foresters, and essentially come up with a woodland plan. And when Jay asked me to talk today, I had a little think. I was like, I wonder how many sites we've actually designed in wet woodland or wet woody habitat. And I consulted my colleague Jess Cooper, who's the other landscape architect in the team. And out of the 21 sites that we have designed and have gone through consultation to date, 14 of those have some form of wet woodland, scrape, seasonal wetland, and riparian planting. So I thought that was absolutely brilliant. I actually had no idea that we had been including it quite as often as we had. And here's a list of some of those sites and where they are in the country. I won't go through them all individually, but they're really evenly distributed across the whole of England. And just showing on the right there some of the design plans that we've done. The one on the top is the site in Lincolnshire, Micklehome, where we're next to a local nature reserve. So we consulted with the volunteers there to determine whereabouts on the site would be most suitable for us, because there were some very waterlogged wet areas, and where would work best to complement the wet woodland they have on their existing site, and where we could be implementing it on our side of the boundary. And then the two at the bottom, one is Picklescott, which is in the Shropshire Hills National Landscape. There was some existing wet scrubby woodland on the site that we haven't yet, we've done the planting, but we haven't yet implemented the woodlands, the scrapes that we're planning to put in. So there's 2 areas of scrapes going in on that site. One of them is where we've got an open space that we had to have for a view from a property. So we thought we'd just sort of enhance the view and create some interesting habitat around there. And it was in consultation with the ecologists, we sort of came up with the best location for the scrapes. And then the other one on the bottom right is a site in Devon, which is more of a riparian woodland. This is riparian edge along the waterway, Waggerford river. This is a very small river. And we've also incorporated, there's an existing pond, and we've incorporated some additional scrapes in that site as well. Next slide, please, Jay. So today I'm just going to talk to you about Lower Lye Woods, which is one of our smallest sites in the Shropshire Hills National Landscape. This one was planted last winter, and as you can see, it's sort of in a valley. We've got the River Red Lake that runs through the site, and the site is split into two halves by a sort of local B road. On the southern side where the river is, it's a floodplain, and the river is a tributary to the River Clun, which is an SAC, or I've got to get this right, it's the freshwater pearl mussel. The site is modified grassland entirely. It's been heavily grazed, very compacted soils from overgrazing. And yeah, you can see the topography around the site is sort of flanked by, well, it's flanked actually by Forestry England woodlands to the northeast and southwest, and they're very steep-sided hills. It's absolutely beautiful. I think on the next slide there might be some pictures of the site, or it might be the one after that. Oh no, here we go. So it's a beautiful site. I remember when I first went here, I thought this is absolutely fantastic. I love this. How exciting to be able to design some woodland into this area. And we knew almost immediately that it would be predominantly broadleaf woodland, just because of the sensitivity of the landscape, it being in a national landscape, and also having a fair amount of existing coniferous woodland around it. It just, the landscape character kind of lent itself much more to broadleaf woodland. And you can see from these images, there's the bottom left is the River Red Lake, very prone to extreme weather conditions. So in the summer, it almost dries out completely. And in the winter, there's quite a few records of flooding, particularly in downstream communities in the village of Bucknell. Next slide, please, Jay. So the first thing we do when we take on a new site is a very thorough site assessment, and Jay described brilliantly the kind of processes that we go through at this stage for our site assessment. So looking at local topography, land use, existing priority habitat. So there was nothing, well, apart from the hedgerows and the river itself, there was, the priority habitats were kind of on the periphery of the site. So good quality semi-improved grassland, some lowland, dry acidic grassland, and upland hay meadows. And so we do a preliminary ecological assessment of the site, and sometimes that will lead to a natural vegetation classification survey, depending on what comes up, and sometimes it'll lead to kind of individual habitats and species surveys, just depending on what comes out of the PEA. Other things we look at are soils, landscape character. We have a landscape and visual appraisal done on all the site, and heritage. And I probably missed something. There are a lot of surveys that are done in the early stages, and probably most crucially with this site was a site visit that we undertook with Natural England, representatives from Natural England, Environment Agency, Shropshire Wildlife Trust, Shropshire Hills National Landscape Team, and Forest Services colleagues. And we got together as a big group to have a look at the site, and actually the focus probably predictably was around the river and water management. I think at the time that we went, we couldn't actually park where we wanted to park because the road was completely flooded. So there are a lot of there were a lot of water issues on the site, and it was really interesting to be able to get together with that team of people, and the people who knew the local area very well, who had worked there a long time, so could impart that knowledge to us throughout the design process. So the main things that came out of that were about enhancing flood attenuation to increase the available wetland habitat, slowing the flow to reduce flooding in downstream communities, decompacting the soil, aerating the soil, breaking up some of the land drainage that we spotted. A couple of fields were unseasonably dry compared to adjacent fields, so we assumed that there must be some old land drainage under there. And then we took all of that information and spent a bit of time back and forth with looking at our objectives and what our funding allows from the Nature for Climate Fund as to how we could come up with the best design for the site. Next slide, please. So here, these are this is what went to consultation, to public consultation. So on the left is one of the boards that we present at the consultation, and on the right is the woodland design plan. This doesn't just come immediately. This is sort of weeks and weeks of toing and froing and back and forth and consulting with stakeholders before we get to this point. And with the Nature for Climate Fund for our team, we had some absolutely brilliant suggestions from the Environment Agency and from Shropshire Wildlife Trust, who actually drew up a plan for us, particularly for the kind of the water management, for creating swales and wetland and leaky dams. Our funding doesn't cover all of that, so it is predominantly for tree planting. So what we had to do was come up with a design that could still accommodate that in the future. So we really wanted to be able to apply for external funding to implement all of these wonderful ideas that would be great for the site, but we also had to be realistic about what we were able to fund and our timescales at the time. So our programme is quite fast paced. So we go from acquiring a site to planting within about 18 months. So we had to sort of be realistic about what we could achieve, but also not put anything in place that would then stop things from happening later down the line. So as you can maybe see, I don't know how clear it is on the small screen, but we've there's along the River Red Lake, there's a 20-metre buffer of riparian woodland, bit of open space incorporated into there as well. We were advised to, on the south of the river where the floodplain is, to plant very low density, widely spaced broadleaf woodland, mostly to kind of keep the river open, allow sunlight in, because there's quite a steep hill to the south, so it gets shaded out quite easily. And the idea here was just to keep it as open as possible. There were some wet flushes identified on the site, just that you can see one in the south, basically below the river, where we proposed similar riparian planting. I'll get onto species in a minute. And then we also identified, and unfortunately I can't, let me see if I can take control and then I can point it out on the plan. Work? Yes, there we go. So in this little area here was an old meander that we looked at, and we proposed to reinstate it at some point in the future. So we left that for the time being. We didn't do anything about it. We thought we'll leave that as it is, and hopefully we'll be able to get some funding to reinstate that meander and sort of contribute to the flood attenuation plan. So that was the plan that went to consultation. The species that we included were in the riparian and the wet flush areas were alders, willows, grey willow and goat willow, black poplar, aspen, some silver birch, rowan and peduncular oak. And then in the more widely spaced broadleaf planting to the south, we had some silver birch, sessile oak, small leaf limes and other mixed broadleafs. We try to use the Forest Research's forest development types when we're designing all these new woodlands. We find them really useful as a tool to look at sort of continuous cover and species that are going to work well together. So that's what we did here. And have the next slide, please. These are some photos taken from last, probably winter, of the riparian planting. So I think they're fairly self-explanatory. I think the riparian planting must have been the first to go in because it's all you can see on some of them, and the aerating of the soils prior to planting in some of those more compacted fields. Next slide, please, Jay. And then moving on from there, and this is actually an area that I haven't been so involved in. So I've been speaking to colleagues who have been putting this plan together for the future of River Red Lake and the water management in the area. So my colleague has done some modelling of the River Red Lake flow route with and without large woody debris in place. An application has gone into Shropshire Council. I think it's been approved by Shropshire Council for large woody debris and for that floodplain scrape that I mentioned earlier. Some funding has been offered from the Ecological Corridors funding. Now, I think this is DEFRA funding. I spoke to my colleague yesterday about this, and then I quickly looked it up trying to find out where this funding came from. If anyone has any more idea of that, then do let me know, because I couldn't find it when I looked it up, so I'm not entirely sure that the information I was given was correct. But we have about £5,500 of funding for this project, so it's not a lot. And actually, I think Jay mentioned this earlier, the hinging of trees into the watercourse. So instead of pinning timbers into the sides banks of the river to create these leaky woody dams, we're going to be hinge treeing, using hinge trees, so that we keep the root balls as an anchor point. I think they're better for sediment retention long term, and also, from what I understand, less likely to be washed downstream in a flood event. And the idea is that then these woody debris dams will then create more opportunities for inundation and more wetland habitat on the site. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens in the future. I don't have any images because this hasn't happened yet. I don't have any sort of after implementation photos. And also with a lot of our sites, because a lot of them have been planted very recently, we don't really have the sort of wonderful wet woodland photos to show you of how this has all worked out. So over the next few years, it'll be really exciting to see what's happening on our sites, to be able to share that with people and get people to sort of see these projects as case studies in real life. And yeah, I think that's my last slide.